All right, we're good now. We're good. Is this a good-looking shirt or what? Huh? As soon as I get, hey, what's that? Right? I was watching a video on Facebook, and I don't know the guy's name that it was his podcast for, but the guy that runs the podcast is not a Christian. But he had, and this is going to be bad, I'm telling the story, but he's an older gentleman. He is the professor emeritus for math at Cambridge University. His name is John. I can't think of his last name right now. Just a wonderful older man. And it was interesting. Josh Howerton was showing this clip on his show, right? You guys all know that I'm a big follower of Josh Howerton. And he was pointing out that the podcast, the guy that is his podcast, he made a comment about, he says, every time I have a Christian that's on my show, he goes, there's something that's different about it. And he says, one of the things that I see inside of you is a joy that I don't see with the other people that come on my show. And he made it a point, right, we always talk about that we are the fragrance of Christ, that we should live our lives in joy, right, that we should live our lives in joy. And I would say joy is deep-seated. It's not happiness. Happiness is based on what? Circumstances. Joy is based on what's inside of you. That you can have that joy regardless of what's happening to you there. So we should be marked by that. So the other thing that when they were singing, it reminded me of a story that's in the book that we're going to be talking about next Wednesday at Mark and Sandy's for our book club, The Applause of Heaven. How many of you remember the story about the gentleman that kept a chair in his hospital room, right? And somebody had come into his hospital room and said, what's that chair for? He says, that's where Jesus sits, right? That's where Jesus sits. And he goes, when he prays to the chair, right? He visualizes Jesus in that chair. And at the end of the story, the gentleman had passed away, but when they came in and found him in his room, he had gotten out of his hospital bed, and his head was on that chair, right? And I would tell you something that I think sometimes we overcomplicate prayer. I think there's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about in prayer, but that's what prayer is a conversation with our Lord, right? I think since I read that story, I literally have, if you've ever been to my house, I know some of you have that go to the men's study on Tuesday mornings. We have what Eileen affection refers to, or I guess it's affection referred to as a keeping room, right? So it's right off the kitchen. We have two nice big swivel easy chairs, and that's where I do my quiet time in the morning. And since reading that story, I literally visualize Jesus sitting in that other chair, right? Yeah, Sandy. I'm not sure on that. Yeah. Does anybody else know that? That on Passover that they have an empty chair? Yeah. Has somebody heard that as a tradition? Okay, I'm sorry. Where's Brent and Teresa when we need them? Right? They'd have had the answer to that, right? I know they would have had the answer to that, so I don't know the answer. So, all right, let's talk with Jesus before we open His Word. Lord, thank you so much. I just love being among these brothers and sisters. Lord, doing what all of us love the most is reading your word. Lord, your word is so full of encouragement, so full of grace and mercy. Help us to see today, Lord, as we go through this chapter, what you want us to glean from the story of Joseph. Just so many parallels, Lord, to your life, and help us to see those. Give us spiritual eyes that we might learn more about you and serve you and our neighbors in a more loving way. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. How many of you seen Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dream? I don't want you to be thinking about Donny Osmond the entire time, right, that we are having the study today. I'm sure Joseph looked nothing like Donny Osmond, right? But a great musical. If you've never had a chance to see that musical, it's a great musical. So you've seen it? Rosa saw it in Florida. There you go. You loved it. Was Donny Osmond playing Joseph?
Oh, no, it was the kids from high school.
Oh, kids from high school.
Kids from high school.
There we go.
Over there in Port St. Lucie.
There we go.
It was beautiful. They did a beautiful job.
Beautiful job.
Yes.
There we go. Well, if you saw it in high school, Joseph was probably the right age, right? Because we're going to find out while this happens, he's fairly young, right, in this. So we are now in a word that you learned last week. We are now in the Toledot of Jacob, right? So if you remember last week, that exciting chapter 36 where you got all your grandchildren's, your suggestions for your grandchildren's name, that was the Toledot of Esau. So there are actually 10 Toledots, and we said that what the word Toledot means is the generations of. So it's really kind of going through the legacy of that. So we're not actually going to go as deep here. We're really only following two stories on the Toledot of Jacob. And one will be covering, probably quite a few weeks, the story of Joseph and how the brothers ultimately come to Egypt. And next week we're going to be talking about a fairly unfortunate event in the life of Judah, right? Next week. So let's get into the Toledot. It's the story of generations of the son. The story of Joseph, to me, and Rosa got really excited when she goes, I love the story of Joseph, right? How many of you agree it's a great story, right? Joseph's probably the most intriguing story, I think, in the entire Old Testament. It's a story that shows, I would say, God's sovereignty more than anything. That regardless of what the circumstances are, God is ultimately in control. And that he is going to work ultimately for his will, his desire, despite sometimes, we've kind of talked about it, is that when man plans, God does what? God laughs, right? We said last week too, his plans won't be thwarted. And we saw that in the Toledot of Esau as well, is that God is sovereign. God, through this, is working to ultimately save the nation of Israel. Because not a real big tribe at this point, right? We talked about the huge size of Esau's tribe, right, and ultimately his descendants. But right now, Israel's a pretty small ragtag group of people. And we're going to see as we go through this that ultimately God has a design to get them to Egypt for many reasons. The story also has, like I had mentioned, a lot of parallels to the story of Jesus. In fact, certain Bible scholars feel there's close to 130 similarities between the story of Joseph and the story of Jesus, right? So I'm not going to point all of them out. I don't know that I could point all of them out, but if there's similarities that you see, please raise your hand, let the group know what you see in terms of similarities with the story of Jesus. So let's get into the text. First 4 verses. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account, or Toledot, of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brother, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was born to him in his old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. So some of you have different words than ornamented robe. Tunic, some of you have multicolored, right? Multicolored tunic. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. What stands out to you in these verses?
Jesus lived in Canaan.
What's that? Jesus lived in Canaan. That's one similarity, right? Rick, you are so good.
I'm on it, man. And his father loved him. More than the others.
Well, you think about it, the idea of favored son, right? Favored son here we're talking about as well. So a couple of things that stand out here to me is Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, right? Of Rachel. So Rachel had only 2 sons, right? Joseph. And then she died in childbirth when Benjamin was born. So if you think about it, 12 sons, who should actually have the favor within in the family? Reuben, right? Reuben should have the favor of all of them, right? Because if you look at it, Joseph was actually the 11th son that was born. So he should really be way down on the pecking order in terms of how Jacob views him. But we see that, Jacob always favored Rachel, right? We saw this favor many times. If we think about how he favored Rachel, well, we saw that, Mark, right? That she was the better looking of the two. So he first worked for Rachel, right? Is ultimately when he worked for Laban, he was working for Rachel. We know that Laban pulled a Jacob on him and deceived him, right? And he ended up getting Leah as his first bride. But that was his desire, was to work for Rachel. He worked another 7 years for Rachel's hand there. If you remember the time when Leah had found that very rare flower that was supposed to have kind of aphrodisiac qualities to it, what did Leah do with that flower? Yeah, so she basically bribed Rachel to say, let me sleep with him tonight. So what that meant was, Leah didn't spend a lot of time with Jacob, that Rachel was the preferred sexual partner of Jacob. So she had to give him a very rare flower in order to do that. And then ultimately, when they were coming to meet Esau, who was furthest protected in the rear? It was Rachel, right? Leah was out front because we were figuring if Esau was going to attack, she would be protected. And we not only see that he had favored Rachel so often too, but we also saw that it caused issues or dysfunctions in the family. And one of the things that we've talked about in here a few times is Jacob was a great businessman. He was a lousy leader of a household, right? He allowed this kind of favoritism to cause issues. And obviously the biggest issue that it caused was his daughter Dinah running off, right, to Shechem. We talked about the rape of Dinah in the town of Shechem. And then what did the boys do in response? In their anger, they killed everybody. They deceived them first, saying, yep, we're going to intermarry with you, but you have to be circumcised, right? If you remember the story, they got weakened, they went into Shechem and killed all of them. So we've not only seen that favor caused them the children issues, but now we're going to start to see a little bit deeper issues there. And we already kind of know to some extent what Jacob's other children are capable of. We've already seen that, right? So it caused resentment. So if we look in here, it says that Joseph was tending the flocks. And if you look at the words that they use in Hebrew there, he's not the lowest on the totem pole. He's actually the one in charge, right? He's managing the flock in terms of tending it there. So that would normally go to who as a job? To Reuben, right? Reuben should be the one that is tending the flocks. Joseph, if you think of it, should be a shepherd. Who you think about the story of David, right? When Samuel came to meet Jesse's kids, all the kids were brought in front of him. He says, good looking, tall. And they're like, well, is this all of them? Because Samuel kept getting told what? This is not the one. This is not the one. I don't look at the outside. I look at their heart. Where was David as the youngest? He was out shepherding, right? He was out shepherding. That would have more been Joseph's job, is the shepherd of the family, right? So we see the favor there that Jacob favored Joseph and put him in a place, to some extent, of kind of leading his sons in terms of the flock at a very young age. So it says that Israel loved him more than any of other son because he was born in his old age, right? I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. It says before that, it says that Joseph gave a bad report. Now, how many of you, when you read that, think of the word tattletale? Right? Dad, you got to hear what the brothers are doing, right? But tattletale, if you actually look at the meaning of the word tattleteller, it's a teller of tattles. That's a really good definition. But a tattle is something that's not true, right? It's more gossip, it's more hearsay. And there's nothing in here that basically tells us that Joseph is telling mistruths about what his brothers are doing. Now, we don't know exactly what that bad report is. Maybe they're not doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. Or maybe, as we've seen, what this family is capable of, they may be engaged in something that's not real copacetic, right? So he comes and brings it. But it says it could have been poor work, mischief, but it shows Joseph again in a position of leadership with his father. His father wants a report on what's going on out in the field. Okay? So verse 3 states that his favoritism is he was born in his old age. In Hebrew, the words for old age is the phrase Ben Zakwan. I don't know if I'm getting that exactly right, but Ben Zakwan. Is that right?
That's right.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it, right? Which literally means wise son, right? Wise son. So, in fact, the word Zakwan can be translated as bearded or beard, a sign of both age and wisdom. So, to some extent, part of the favoritism might not have only been the fact that he was the only, the firstborn of Rachel. It could have also been he might have been the smartest one in the lot, right?
Later on, he's got some good leadership.
He's got some, yeah, he's got good leadership and management skills, right? So that might have been part of the reason for the favoritism as well. So, but you can see, then the last part here too is wise beyond his years. And if you think about what their brothers had done, their brothers had not shown this kind of wisdom in the past. So also it talks about Joseph making the robe for him, richly ornamented, multicolored. And if you think about what the robe represented, basically yeah, Scott, you have a question?
I'm just curious about, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, but didn't he have David after?
He had Benjamin after him, yeah. Yeah, it's like, why did it, and that's why the Hebrew where it says wise son, right? He probably, there was some favor in the fact that he was such a wise.
Yeah, more so than this.
Yeah.
Well, he was the firstborn child
Of his favored.
loved and wanted. So
And she
Yeah.
died giving birth to Benjamin, so that might have soured him over there.
Yeah, John. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Probably blame Benjamin for it, right? Blame Benjamin for it. So the robe in ancient times were a sign of honor and authority, right? There as well. So it also represented in ancient times as well a sign of birthright. So really, it should be hanging around Reuben, but it's on Joseph. So you can imagine that the hatred for them, right, was quite high, right? That he had all this favor. Oh yeah, it's going to be Rachel's kids. Oh yeah, he gets the coat. So basically, Joseph becomes a pariah to his brothers. It says they can't speak a kind word about him. But despite that, he seems to be the type of person that carries himself extremely well, right? Other thoughts in those first four verses. All right, let's read 5 through 8. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So what do you see in here? Oh, he really had the dream, right? So if you think of it, this dream for Joseph was probably not only a dream, but a what? A prophecy. So it was a dream that was given to him by God. There's no way that he would know what's going to be happening. So obviously God is present in these dreams as well. So if he's got this dream, he feels as though what? I have to share what the Lord has shared with me. as difficult as this thing, because you can imagine when he's thinking about telling this that the brothers are going to do what? They're not going to like it, right? They're not going to like it. So, but I think if they don't say a kind word about him anytime, it's like, why not tell them? Why not tell them the dream, right? Because they don't say a kind word about him. But what else do you see in that dream? What is the object that all the brothers become? Yep, they all bow down to him. So ultimately, we know how this, hopefully you all know how the story ends, is that ultimately they bowed down to him in Egypt, not realizing it's Joseph. And why do they go into Egypt? For a famine. So isn't it interesting in this prophecy that all of them appear as what? Sheaves of grain. Because that's exactly what Jacob is later going to send them into Egypt to get. Because there was a famine in the land of Canaan, but Egypt had grain, right? So it's definitely a prophecy from God here as well. So it's a very important symbol in the grain as well. So it says, I just got the question, why tell the brothers? He knows it would anger his brothers. He was sharing a word of prophecy from God. He wasn't a man that lacked tact, rather as a man who's obedient to God. That's one way of looking at it. Share your way of looking at it, Rich.
Dr. Ryrie and I agree.
Yeah.
He didn't have to. There's nothing saying that he needed to share this prophecy. The prophecy was given to him. He knows this is going to happen. So maybe he's wise, but he needs to work on his interpersonal skills.
That's possible too, yeah.
Because knowing how his brothers felt and then telling them this probably precipitated what's going to happen in the next few verses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's nothing indicating that he needed it to share the prophecy.
Yeah, that's true.
He had, like Mary, he could have pondered this in his heart.
Yeah.
But he chose to tell his brothers that they were going to die.
Yeah.
Especially since they hated him already.
Yeah.
Definitely not mending any bridges.
Yeah. And it might very well be that he lacked tact, right? That he was kind of trying to goat them with it too. Is look what God shared with me, right? Even the fact that he had these dreams. Another interesting fact that you see in this is God does speak in dreams, right? One of the last couple of books ago that we read was the book called Killing Christians. And I've talked about it many times, of how many Muslims now are seeing Jesus in dreams and visions, right? But what's interesting that you see throughout the entire Old Testament is you notice that the brothers don't need an interpretation of what this dream means. Is right away they know what the dream means. But it's interesting that as we go further in the story of Joseph, all the other dreams are dreamt by Gentiles. And none of them can understand what their dreams mean, right? So it's interesting, you'll see that the Jews never need someone to interpret their dreams. It's always the Gentiles that do. We see that not only is going to be going forward here in the case of the cupbearer and the baker, right? And then ultimately Pharaoh is going to have these dreams that need to be interpreted by a Jewish person. What other story do we know from the Old Testament that has that same thing? It's Daniel, right? Yeah. Yeah, in a dream. But I was saying, as far as the Gentiles not being able to interpret it, you think about the story of Daniel and the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And it was Daniel that interpreted that dream for him. Right? So it gives,
I mean, in all fairness, it wasn't all that complicated. He says, my
even
yours bow down to it.
even an old Marine can figure this one out, right? you guys always know my line, right? If I say, you were in the Marine Corps? Yeah, I'll talk slower, right? I'm sorry, Bob, but I digress. But it's interesting that you see that the Gentiles need them interpreted. Paul said in the 11th chapter of Romans, Paul mentions the fact that Israel was appointed to receive the oracles of God, right? Oracles of God. All right, so the dreaming continues. Verses 9 through 11. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream. and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. All right, Bob, interpret this dream.
That looks to me like his mom.